today. The Rambam today speaks about lending money, and a person volunteered or not volunteered to be the guarantor, which in Hebrew it's called arev. So let's say I lend someone money, and then a third guy comes and says, "Oh, I see you lend him money, I'll be his guarantor." Or he sees a person taking a borrower to trial, and the guy is like saying, "You owe me money, you owe me money, you owe me money." And the guy says, "Don't worry, leave him alone, I'll guarantee his money." Or a guy is choking his friend in the street because he owes him money, and the guy walks by and says, "Leave him alone, I'll pay you the money, I'll pay you the money." Is this guy liable or not? And he says no. Because this person that became a guarantor after the action. The money was already lent. And now he says, "I want to be a guarantor. Leave him alone, I'll be the guarantor. Don't choke him, I'll be the guarantor." It's just saying it to get you away from him. And don't bother him. But he's not really ready to commit to pay the loan. So therefore he has no obligation to guarantor, even though he says that he'll be the guarantee. However, if when the time of the transaction takes place, when he gives him the loan, and before he gives him the loan, the guy says, "I'll guarantee the loan before," and then he gives it to him, that's called a guarantee by the action, by the transaction. Then you become automatically responsible. That if the borrower doesn't have the money, they could go to the guarantor and collect the funds. But that's a guarantor that became by the transaction. And it's automatic. Because it was done by the transaction, it's an automatic done, and he's liable, and he has to pay him with no problem. However, what happens if the transaction was already done, and you want to become a guarantor after the transaction? Is there any way to do that? The Rambam says the only way to do it is if you make a kinyan. A kinyan is you do some kind of transaction that represents that you're really becoming a guarantor, not just by words, but by action. Like, for example, pick up an item that belongs to the lender or the borrower, sign a contract. You have to do an action. Just to say words that I am a guarantor, once the action was done and the transaction was done, doesn't mean anything. But if you did something and you made an actual contract, or you signed a paper, or you did a kinyan chalipin, and you did something to represent that you really mean it, then you could be a guarantor even after the transaction. So basically you have two kinds of guarantor. A guarantor that automatically becomes a guarantor without anything, just if he was there before the transaction, that makes him liable, or even after the transaction if he does something to represent that he means it serious. Otherwise it's just there to push off the lender from the borrower, so the lender shouldn't bother him. Anyways, as the Torah says, may God bless us and the whole Am Yisrael that we should always be lenders and not borrowers. Amen.